So then I will go on to the next speaker, who is Abayomi Azikiwe, who is the editor of Pan-African Newswire. He's a graduate of Wayne State University in Detroit, with degrees in political economy as well as organizational and administrative studies, and has worked for several decades with various liberation movements and progressive governments in Africa and the Caribbean and other parts of the world. He serves as a geopolitical analyst for various satellite television networks and other press agencies internationally. So Abayomi, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Radhika. And thank you again for inviting me to participate in this very, very important webinar. I just wanted to speak briefly on Chris Matlhako's legacy in regard to the struggle for national liberation and internationalism. South Africa, the continent, and indeed the international proletariat has lost a dedicated fighter for freedom, economic justice, and peace with the transition of Comrade Chris Matlhako. Comrade Matlhako was known around the globe as a selfless cadre in the struggle against national oppression, economic exploitation, and imperialist war. As a high school student, he was a member of the Congress of South African Students, COSAS, which played a pivotal role during the 1980s and early 1990s in the monumental campaign that eventually led to the elimination of the apartheid regime and the realization of the democratic breakthrough in 1994. During 1985, Comrade Matlhako was disappeared by the South African police for many days, where he underwent torture in an effort to discourage his activism. Nonetheless, he continued his work, joining the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party. He rose through the ranks of the SACP, becoming a member of the Central Committee and being elected as the second Deputy Secretary General of the South African Communist Party. Cuban solidarity was a major focus of his work in South Africa and internationally. The Socialist Society in Cuba has been subjected to a draconian blockade by successive administrations, both Republican and Democrats, in the United States. Every year, the United Nations General Assembly votes overwhelmingly to abolish the blockade, placing this demand within the mainstream of world public opinion. Since the 1960s, the Cuban Revolution has contributed immensely to the national liberation movements in Africa and the building of socialist-oriented states. During the period between 1975 and 1988, Cuban internationalists fought alongside the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, the MPLA government, the Southwest Africa People's Organization, SWAPO, and the African National Congress to defeat the racist South African Defense Forces, which resulted in the withdrawal of apartheid troops from Southern Angola and the independence of the Republic of Namibia in 1990. In this same time period, there was the release of President Nelson Mandela and other leaders of the ANC, the SACP, and the democratic movement as a whole. The people of Africa continue to pay tribute to the role of President Fidel Castro and the subsequent Cuban leaders for their historic and ongoing solidarity work with the African continent. Now in 2023, there remains the threat of imperialist military intervention in the African Union member states. The United States Africa Command, AFRICOM, was established in 2008, ostensibly to assist post-colonial states in enhancing their national security capacity in the burgeoning so-called war on terrorism. However, over the last decade and a half, since the deployment of AFRICOM, the security crisis in Africa has worsened. There is the reemergence of military coups in several West African states in response to the presence of insurgent groupings. The present situation in the Republic of Sudan is a clear example of the political impact of US policy in the North and Horn of Africa regions. The strengthening of the military apparatus in Sudan by Washington and its allies has further marginalized the popular forces which have engaged in mass demonstrations and strikes since December of 2018. The people of this oil-rich and geostrategic state are demanding a genuinely democratic dispensation. Comrade Matlhako was a critic of AFRICOM and stated clearly in an interview with United World in September of 2021 that the imperialist military command structures should be removed from the continent. This demand echoes the popular sentiment of the workers and youth in various states, particularly in West Africa, where demonstrations of solidarity with the Russian Federation and its special military operation in Ukraine have taken place over the last year. I just want to quote briefly from this interview that I mentioned from United World International. This news website quoted Comrade Matlhako as saying, quote, "These military coups are not the answer to the challenges that confront the continent for a host of reasons. First, most of the militaries on the continent are extensions and or appendages of the military ethos of the West. They are trained and funded by former colonial and imperialist elements that continue to seek a presence on the continent through various ways. This is in pursuit of the economic objectives and goals of Western multinational corporations seeking to exploit the rich mineral wealth of the continent," unquote. In other comments in the same interview, Comrade Matlhako went on to emphasize, quote, that Biden and his administration have continued AFRICOM on the continent. It suggests he and his administration are not committed to redesigning the relationship with the continent. AFRICOM and its military positioning do not suggest cordial relations, but a dominant and military power, unequal power relationships, applying coercive force and subjecting the continent to the dictates of the imperialist powers. Biden must withdraw and disband AFRICOM and accept the sovereignty of the nations of the continent. Balanced trade and other relations must be allowed to flourish between countries of the continent and the rest of the world. And the people of the continent must be allowed democratically without the influence of the West, engage their challenges and decide on their trajectory and political project. The West and North America must be just another international partner that the continent can engage without being coerced through illegal and unilateral sanctions and the so-called war on terror, unquote. Very, very powerful words from the comrade. South Africa today is facing a growing crisis of relations with Washington involving two major issues. The position of the ANC government, led by President Cyril Ramaphosa, has maintained a non-aligned position in regard to the Ukrainian war. South Africa, along with the majority of the governments and peoples around the world, want a negotiated settlement to the Ukraine situation, as well as a global security framework which recognizes the emergence of a multipolar world. This view represents a repudiation of US imperialism and its foreign policy imperatives. This attempt by the US to dictate the terms of international relations for independent states in the global South and even beyond seeks to determine the nature of relations between South Africa, Russia, and the People's Republic of China. South Africa held joint naval exercises with Beijing and Moscow earlier this year, very much to the chagrin of the Biden administration. Earlier this month, which represents on the 25th of this month, the 60th anniversary of the formation of the Organization of African Unity, which is the predecessor of today's African Union, the US ambassador to South Africa charged Pretoria with selling arms to Russia. Although the Ramaphosa administration has denied these claims, the reality is that South Africa is an independent sovereign state, which can make its own decisions in regard to political, economic, and military affairs. Even with more than 6.5 decades of independent struggles on the continent, the US is threatening South Africa with economic sanctions over the arms sales allegations. These developments illustrate the importance of the work of Comrade Matlhako in the national liberation, anti-war, and anti-imperialist movements. We must continue to advance the ideas for which he fought so gallantly. Thank you very much for listening.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.